Good morning, Grid Connections listeners. Today we're diving into the realities of urban EV ownership with Robert Hoffman, host of the Urban EV podcast. If you've ever wondered what it takes to own an electric vehicle in a city like New York, from charging challenges to infrastructure innovations, this episode is packed with firsthand insights you won't want to miss. Robert shares his journey from investing in Tesla stock in 2016 to finally making the leap to an electric vehicle while living in Brooklyn. He opens up about the real-world experiences of public charging, the ongoing struggles with range anxiety, and why misinformation is still holding many drivers back from making the switch. We also get into the role of plug-in hybrids, how rideshare drivers are shaping urban charging demand, and the promising future of curbside charging solutions like It's Electric. Beyond the daily challenges, we discuss how emerging networks like IONNA are working to improve non-Tesla fast charging reliability, and why level 2 charging could be the key to widespread adoption in major cities. If you're curious about the future of electric vehicle infrastructure, or just looking for an honest take on what it's really like to go electric in an urban environment, this episode is for you. If you enjoy the episode, we'd love for you to share it with at least one other person who might find it valuable. And don't forget to leave us a review. Your feedback helps us reach more listeners who are passionate about the future of transportation. Plus, we're launching a brand new Grid Connections newsletter. Stay ahead of the curve with expert insights, industry updates, and exclusive content from our episodes. Sign up now using the link in the show notes. With that, enjoy.
Hey, I'm excited to be here, Chase. Thanks for having me. I would say, obviously we're going to file this under Great Minds Think Alike. We have similar podcasts here and similar interests. Do you want me to dig down deep into how I got to where I am today?
Well, we got an hour, so let's
do this.
Let's use it.
Well, I think there's an overriding theme that a lot of people that are attracted to EVs. There is sustainable green energy. And there's a bigger sort of holistic picture of what kind of drew us here. Now, sometimes you can be techie geek, and it's just fun, exciting stuff playing with electrons. And that's certainly an element of it as well. But, I think this is one of those things that way back when I saw, living here in the Northeast of the United States, I think this is the front row seat to climate change here. I think it's been a lot worse in a lot of other parts of the planet. But, when I grew up, winters were winter. It iced over. It was cold over here. And, I remember the first time, it was, 60, 70 degrees in February. I'm like, what's going on? Like, this never, ever, ever happened. And when you kind of lift the veil, if you feel like it, and really dig deep into what's going on and humans' contribution to carbon and how things are our fault, and this is specifically human man-made climate change, you can't unsee that. Now, looking ahead towards people who are potentially going to embrace EVs, that's not a good marketing tool. Scare tactics don't work, and a lot of people have their heads in the sand. And that was part of my motivation here is actually starting the podcast, was how can I deliver this message to people who just aren't interested or just don't want to know that EVs are going to save the planet. And they're not going to save the planet. By driving EV, you're not going to per se save the planet. But this is sort of a step, a brick in the wall of the whole sustainable energy process. And with scale and the embracing of green energy networks and infrastructure, also by driving EVs, it's going to help mankind get to a better place. So that was part of my motivation. And I just think EVs are cool. I think they're fast and they're awesome. And I do love tech. It's a hot button topic right now, but, I invested in Tesla in 2016, before, Musk completely lost his mind. I'm like, I think this company is onto something, and I really want to get behind them. So it's also taken me years to actually get behind the wheel of an EV, because I do live in New York City. I live in Brooklyn, New York, and there are a lot of challenges, and hence the Urban EV podcast that we have here in cities, as opposed to where most of America living at home with a driveway and a garage have with charging. And there's a lot of realities that sort of come into play here when you say, hey, I'd really love to get an EV, but how am I going to do this? And it finally took, for me anyway, I mean, I had a nice powered vehicle before, and that served me well. And I was just like, all right, well, I bought it, it's paid for, and I'll keep driving until the wheels fall off. And that's exactly what happened. And here we were last year in 2024. It's time for a new car. And I'm like, I don't know. Do I dare the dream? Can I get an EV? I mean, I still live in the city here. It's like, I can't get this done. So I started having conversations with my wife about this, and she's like, no way. This is your deal. You're going to have to charge it. Good luck. Figure it out. I'm like, all right, she's probably right. This is pie in the sky for me. It's not realistic. So I started looking into plug-in hybrids. And really, I do believe there's a place for plug-in hybrids. I think right now, in my opinion, it's an EV with a range extender. I think is the way they really need to be marketed. And they're kind of evolving in that direction. When you look at the Scout, new Scout that's coming out, it's much more. It's got I'm not quite sure of how many kilowatts those batteries are, but they're pretty big. I think you're going to get like up to 150 miles of range with them. And then you've got a very small motor that's capable of powering that battery. So, for people who are just completely freaked out by range anxiety, we can get into all of that as well. You've got that. I think that's a great marketing tool. The plug-in hybrids that exist today, though, when I kind of started really looking into them, there is a sort of still a big compromise with the amount of space they take up in the boot of the car, the amount of range you actually get. The fact that you can't fast charge a plug-in, a plug-in hybrid. I was not aware of that at first. I'm like, oh, you can only level 2 charge these things. So on top of all that, I actually still was like, I still think I want to do it. And then I went and I test drove a Sorento, Kia Sorento. And unfortunately, it's got like a 1.6 liter engine with a turbo, and the performance was weird. It was kind of like sluggish and fast. It wasn't consistent. I just didn't like the way it drove. It didn't speak to me. It was the right size for me. We needed a third row. That was the directive my wife gave me. Goes, all right, fine. You do your thing here. You give me a third row because we got kids that play soccer and we need that. She's like, I'll begrudgingly agree to this folly that you're following right now. I'm like, okay, so we did the Sorento thing, did the test drive. I'm like, this is not working. But then once I had my eyes on Kia, I saw the EV9, which is just released last year, and it checked a lot of boxes, and then when I started doing further research in my area, I did realize, there is a public charger, about, 4 or 5 blocks away. Like, how does that work? Is that something I can actually get in on and use? I wasn't quite sure. And how busy is it? And these are flow chargers in New York City. There's a pilot program. I think it was 2021 or something like that these things were launched. They're not in every neighborhood, but there is one in my neighborhood. And I was like, I don't know. Can I do this? Can I, I actually even, I was on some forums. I was like, yeah, I'm thinking of getting an EV, but I don't have any at-home charging. And everyone's like, good luck. Don't do it. You're crazy. Better you than me. I got a lot of that. This is insane. There's no way this is going to work out. And lo and behold, I'm here to share with you, Chase. That worked out pretty well, actually. It was not that big of a deal. I would say on average, the way I drive, I need to charge up once every 2 weeks or so. And these flow chargers are really reasonably priced. It's super cheap when you charge overnight, and that's exactly what I do. So, when I'm running low, for the most part, when I'm using the car regularly, around town, I'll drive over to those chargers. You can see when they're available online. Even here in this congested city, they're open often enough that maybe not always the first time I want to go that it's going to be available, but typically on the second time I take a peek at the app, it's available. So I've been charging on those. You charge up to 100%. It's reasonable. It's still cheaper than gas. And so far so good. So the experience was actually really positive. It's the road tripping where things started getting a little challenging. Chase, what EV are you driving right now?
We have 2. So we have a Tesla Model Y and a Tesla Model 3.
Nice. And that's originally I was like, I'm only going to get a Tesla. I'm only going to get a Tesla. And then the X was out of our budget.
Yeah,
and
especially if you're going for a 3-row, especially.
Yeah. And the Y, they offer that third row, but it's kind of like baby seats back there. They're not real. It's not a real third row. So we kind of checked off crossed off Tesla from our list. And in retrospect now, I'm not quite sure if that was the right move. And I'll tell you why. So this is one of those realities, I think, and this is stuff I talk about on my podcast. I'm certainly going to talk about it on yours as well. And I love EVs. I want to set the table here. I am a supporter of EVs, but there are growing pains, and there are some realities that not everyone is aware of when they get an EV. And while I was aware of a lot of these things in IRL, there's certain other things you sort of discover.
Yeah.
Now, I always knew the power of Tesla, forget the AI and the self-driving, is really the supercharger network. And I knew that by getting a Kia, I was going to be reliant on the others out there, even though technically speaking, Kia is opening up its Tesla and Kia have opened up the doors. We were supposed to be on the supercharger network already. It still hasn't happened, so I guess it's any day now. But I purchased the vehicle last year, so they give you 500 hours of Electrify America. I'm like, I've heard some iffy things about Electrify America, and it's a reputation that's well deserved. I had a lot of challenges. Now, sometimes it's operator error. Your first time you go up to a charger, you're still not quite sure how to, wait, do I start this thing? I press this button, do I plug it in first? These are all simple things. It's part of a learning curve.
For sure, but this is actually part of the reason I'm really glad to have you on, because I think a lot of people, especially if they've been driving EVs for a while and if they're non-Teslas, they kind of play down, oh, the Electrify America's gotten a lot better. Oh, the public chargers are better. This isn't an issue. And my whole kind of mental philosophy has always been with electrification, even before supercharging was a thing, was just that if, and this is true with like really any technology space, but if a technology is going to replace what is already there, it has to be not just as good, it has to be better.
Bingo.
And that, I think, it was really the supercharger that at least got you plug in and walk away. You don't even have to swipe a card. Nothing, and obviously now we got plug and charge and some of these other technologies taken off. But it's really fascinating to hear someone, and I think this is something that more people need to hear about, like, no, it's not completely solved yet. And even as someone such as yourself, that's like gung-ho to try and do it. For people who just want the positives but don't have the ability sometimes to invest the time and figure out all this stuff, it really does need to be figured out.
It does. And we're all early adopters here, and that's, once again, it's attracting the gung-ho types. Plug and charge, I know the technology's out there, but I don't believe there's a standard, I believe, that's been agreed to from the manufacturers, the CPOs, the charge point operators. By the way, I was corrected by a friend of mine. He goes, you use a lot of acronyms on your show. It's like, we don't get them all. Make sure you explain what they are every time you use them for the first time. So I know there's a standard that's out there, but not everyone has basically implemented. I don't know if anyone has, maybe not in my area anyway. And the plug and charge concept really needs to take off. It's really important, because it's another, the credit card reader is another point of failure. There's the initialization and there's the credit card reader, where I feel like often there's something along the ways there where something goes wrong. And the biggest challenge which I've had now for this range anxiety concept, I understand why now this is a thing. It's like, you've got all the route planning software that's out there. There's ChargeWay. I've had Matt Teskey on the, is Matt Teskey or Matt Teskey?
Matt Teskey with a
Matt
K.
Teskey.
No, I've known for a decade.
Sorry about
He's a
that,
great
Matt,
guy.
if you're listening. So I've had Matt Teskey on the show there, and it was just terrific sort of deep dive into how this all works and how it can be so simplified. And that part's great. So where I'm going to go from point A to point B and blah 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 blah, and it's the route planning app is connected to my car, and it knows what my state of charge is. And you have to stop here and here to get to where you're going. That's great. The problem is, I know you live out in Oregon, in the high desert over there, and here in New York, obviously it's a very urban area. But you go up a little north, and you're in the Adirondacks. It can be pretty desolate out there as well. All right, so the route planning software is telling me stop at this charger. It's like that last chance gas station kind of thing. So it's like, this is it, and then you're going to go another 100 miles until there's another one. Maybe even not 100, but possibly.
A decent, yeah.
You're going to go a decent distance. What if that's not working? What if that charger is not working? All right, so I'm arriving there with a 12% state of charge, ready to go. Perfect, let's bring it to 80. Easy peasy, I'm going to get to where I'm going to go. What if there's a problem there? And that happens. And that's where things get very, very stressful. I'm like, you know what? I don't trust that that last charger is going to work. It probably will, but it may not. So now I'm going to stop at the charger before, and now that's going to kind of break up my trip in the wrong manner. And now I'm going to have to charge one extra time by the time I get home. And that still kind of sucks. That's still not that, like you said there, when the technology, when the ease of use is as good, if not better, than what people are used to, that's when you're going to get full embracing from the general public of EVs. It's got to be, it doesn't matter how many extras, how many things you gain from driving an EV. You know, the silence, the acceleration, you know, there's the passing power of my car, you know, my car is a family hauler. It's a third row family hauler. It does 0 to 60 in 4.7 seconds. Now, I'm old enough to remember when the Buick Grand National came out, and it could do 0 to 60, I believe, in 4.7 seconds, and that was mind-blowing. A sports car, well, it was kind of like this cool sedan. It was like a wolf in sheep's clothing. That was as fast, if not faster than a Corvette. That was a badass number to be able to accelerate like that. And here I am, my family hauler. I can do that in my EV as well. And it's cool. It's awesome. It's a really neat thing to have that kind of passing power. And it's usable. Listen, even when I'm driving with my family, some people will think, well, you're not going to use it. You know, you don't need it. You know, you're going to freak your family out. But if nothing else, when you're merging onto a highway, you see there's an open spot there. It's mine. I'm just going to take it.
Like the first week or two of like EV ownership, you may be driving a little bit more.
Oh, you're mashing
the
accelerator.
You're having fun. But yeah, usually like by a month in, you kind of forget about it. And it doesn't really matter. But yeah, there's those moments where it's like, oh, I need to get past this vehicle. I need to get into that spot when I'm on the highway. And it is kind of a luxury. It is really nice.
It's neat. There, like I said, there's just so many positives that come with the car. And obviously, me and you we're willing to deal with some of these negatives. Now, obviously, with the learning curve, you get better at it. But I know that it's funny. I just spoke to my wife just earlier this morning, and I'm going to bring her on to the show with me because it's going to be the point counterpoint, right? At least right now, Chase, you and I are like-minded, right? So in a certain way, we're agreeing, we're finishing each other's sentences. But I think she's a great example of a lot of people out there, like and she's the first person to tell me, and will tell you as well. Like, if it was up to me, no way, no how, I'd never even considered an EV, because it doesn't matter all this cool stuff that you're telling me is you're going to add to my life. You're subtracting something from my life. And she's also dealt with the issues we've had with the chargers. And in one infamous case, we were coming back and from a ski trip, and once again, this is kind of not even a fully remote area. But it was a shopping center. It's like, all right, you know what? We can stop here. We do some shopping. I knew I charged there before. It was Electrify America. The last time I went there, it was not communicating with the route planning app, but it was there and it worked. And the same thing happened again. So I'm like, all right, I'm sure it'll be fine. No, of course, there was not fine. It was I think they were actually installing new stalls, that's a positive, but they were down. And then I was like, oh, now this is a problem because we're really low on charge. And the route planning software was suggesting I go backwards half an hour. This is after a 4-hour trip. I'm like, oh my God, I don't want to do that. And then there was another charger, that 45 minutes away in the direction we were going, but it was at a car dealership. And another thing here's a little intel for everyone else. When you see a charger at a car dealership, sometimes the dealership will just park their own cars in there. Just using it as a parking spot.
There's that, and sometimes you can't access it unless the dealership's open too.
Yes. Sometimes it's in the garage.
Correct.
And sometimes it's out and it's public. And like, I don't know, do I believe what this says? It says that it says there's 2 stalls and one's available. So I'm like, all right, that's a good sign. That means there's some dynamic going on there, and it's I guess it's being used. And it worked, but I literally had to go there at, I was traveling at 45 miles an hour on the highway with the heat off. My wife was not happy about that. My kids were not happy about that. My daughter started getting, my 10-year-old daughter was like kind of getting stressed out. I'm like, it's fine. It's no big deal. We're going to make it. It's going to be okay. And I also knew that once you hit zero, there's still, you see a lot of YouTubers out there that run EVs to the ground, right? They go into
Yeah.
turtle mode eventually until like the thing just dies, which is neat. They do it so you don't have to. And I do know there's an extra 10% with the EV9 after it hits zero. So, I was stressed, but I wasn't that stressed. But, still, my kids in the back were kind
Right.
of freaking out a little bit. So, not great. And once again, as an experience for my wife, she's like, this is the reason why. This is the reason why I would never get an EV.
Yeah, it's the wife factor just stings when you're already down. It's just got to kick
Yeah.
you right when
When's
you're
the last time?
already.
Yeah, when's the last time she experienced that in a car? I mean, I guess
Yeah,
it happened, um, but that being said, so I think I think I've chimed on a lot of negatives here, but I speak to a lot of infrastructure people on my show. I do look at the future. It's about the user experience and where we're heading, and I'm sure you do as well. Um, and the future is bright.
yeah,
IONNA in particular is something here which I'm super excited and bullish about. It is the counterpoint to the supercharging network. Um, they've got some big funds. I imagine they're probably relying on some NEVI infrastructure funds, but at the same time, they're what is it? Stellantis, BMW, Hyundai, they're
yeah.
all behind it.
Very well known large brands with pretty decent reserves to back it up.
Yeah, they've got some deep pockets, and it took them a while to figure out, like, the EV strategy here. If you build it, they will come. No, Tesla figured this out a long time ago. You build a supercharging network, and then you build it.
Yeah,
And then when people know that there is actually a reliable place to charge, then once again, all the stuff we're talking about here, it goes out the window. It doesn't exist anymore. And IONNA is doing some really interesting stuff here. They're all about the user experience at the rechargeries. There's amenities there, really clear labels, high-speed chargers. Someone's on site all the time, so they can nip a problem in the bud. So they should have some serious uptime reliability. And if that works, then that's great. And if you can double the amount of superchargers out there, or high-speed chargers, I should say, then I think that's going to really solve a lot of these issues that we're talking about today.
no, I totally agree, and I think one thing to kind of follow up on, just like how you were talking about with your quite a few things actually, but your experience with like the Tesla side, like, oh, they just have the supercharging network. And I think that is something that's like, oh, it's just the hardware. And one of the things they did do a really good job of, and we're seeing this now from Rivian, a couple more of the kind of software focused startups, but it's like having that information as to one, it's like real time and actually true, as what's at the station, who's actually there, is there a wait? And Tesla has just had that dialed in for years and just like kept pushing the data you get in the car to really make that effect. And I think that's something that is just so underrated. I'm hoping that as more and more of these other brands are put on, more of this data is kind of shared to help other EV drivers start to kind of, you do have to think about a little bit different than gas, but now that there are so many, you can start to kind of optimize and not have to make it's like such a ration or
It
come
becomes
from a point.
thoughtless. You're
Yeah,
tripping
yeah,
anymore when
yeah,
you trust the technology, when you truly
yeah,
trust it, and it's giving
right.
you real-time live data. It's no big deal. Just like you don't think that this gas station is going to run out of gas.
Right.
It's like of course it's going to have
Well,
gas.
and there's been a couple times where it's really nice to see that live data. Like, I try to avoid driving or road tripping on like national holiday weekends, but there's been a couple times where we had to, and you can see like, okay, these three are just swamped, and I have enough range. I can just go like another 20 miles. There's no one there, and just like kind of having that, how to think critically, and with that kind of visibility, you can start traveling faster than. I mean, I don't want to say necessarily faster always than a gas station, but there have definitely been times where I like people go for the cheapest gas and you're waiting for the Costco for 30 minutes or something. I've been there
Yeah.
myself.
Yeah,
But
it's what there's no question, just to do a sort of like a double tap here on Tesla and their technology. And this is one of those things which I realized I drove a Model 3, I rented through Turo before I purchased my car. I just kind of wanted to drive an EV for the first time. Um, And it was interesting even just to get a little taste of Tesla for the first time. I was super excited to check everything out, and then hopping into the Kia. And you realize here, this is this sort of, everyone's beating this drum for years. Tesla's not a car manufacturer, they're a tech company. But you know what? They are a tech company, and their tech is light years ahead of everyone else. You can just tell that the awareness of the car and its surroundings is so much more superior than anyone else. My Kia is great. It feels like it's a high end car that Kia is like not known for that, and they really kind of punching above their weight.
Yeah,
and it's got so many cool things, and it's got a lot of buttons, and people like buttons, right? They want the physical buttons, and I like buttons,
which
too.
I totally get. And I think they make some great products. It is just like I think Tesla approaches it from like the epitome of like the digital first digital mindset. And I think Kia's much more like the analog mindset and how they approach
all
it.
the other
Which
manufacturing car,
to that,
you want tactile feel while I'm driving. I want to be able to grab something without looking at it, and that's correct. That's better in a lot of instances, but you're also beholden to that now. And when I go through the Kia, UI, it's okay. It's just not great. It reminds me of sort of like when Nokia was the leader in cell phone technology, and then this iPhone thing came around, and you're like, the Nokia was super cool. It did a lot, but all of a sudden you're like, oh my god, this is what a phone really can do. And that's where we are with Tesla. And there's still, and even all these great EVs out there that offer all this really neat stuff, they're still that far away, I believe, from Tesla's technology. And that's a big advantage.
Yeah, I think just the lesson in saying this, one of the analogies I've always used is it kind of reminds me, the Nokia one is funny, but what it reminds me, at least for me personally, is like I used to have this old film Rebel, God, I'm drawing a blank of the word, but a Rebel Canon camera that was filmed.
I remember those, yeah.
SLR, that's what I was trying to think of. And with that, you can do so many cool things, but you have to kind of know, I gotta do the exposure, I gotta do this. And I kind of feel like that's the pro and con to the Kia is like, I gotta get to the charger just at the right thing, so I don't have to deal with it like cold gating or not charging at optimal speeds. I maybe this has changed, but I know like you kind of have to heat up the battery or manually
the
precondition all this
stuff. That's a whole other thing.
Yeah,
of course. It's like, because I can't trust the route planning app on the Kia because it's I don't want to say it's garbage. That's an exaggeration. It's just not great. It's made a bunch of mistakes and done weird things and offered weird routes, and I just don't like it. So if you're not using the internal app, now you have to remind yourself to precondition the battery on a road trip. Another step. I don't mind it. It's most people are like, what? I forgot. Oh, now I pulled up. There's a cold battery. It's a cold day. It's going to take a lot longer now to charge. And, now I've got a whole system in place. As soon as I set the destination, I'll set a reminder on my phone, an alarm to go off, or a timer at a certain time. Okay, fine. That's preconditioning. Boom. Let's do this. Yeah, it's, and
that's where the camera analogy is so funny to me, is because I used to use this SLR all the time. I loved it. And I really enjoyed kind of the process, and it was fun. But then eventually my iPhone camera got good enough, and it kind of killed me inside to be taking pictures with my phone, of all things. But sometimes you just have to go with the thing that's right there. You don't have to take it out of a bag. You don't have to do all these, like the finicky part of it. It just works.
It's the path of least resistance.
Exactly.
And that wins the day. Yeah.
As they always say, the best camera is the camera you have with you. And just being able to pull out your phone real quick and boom. There is advantage to that. I think that is something that Tesla's done and understood really well. But the thing I kind of want to take a step back about that, what you're discussing is so fascinating to me, and I think is 100% true, is the outward kind of optics. And what a lot of people think is, I live in rural Minnesota, or I live somewhere else. I can't go there. There's no EV chargers. Well, you start looking. Yeah, there's usually, in a lot of ways, I find it's usually easier, especially if you can charge at home. That's a decent caveat. But if you live in a more rural area or even a suburb, and you have sometimes even just level 1 charging, but can do some form of level 2, the day-to-day especially becomes so much easier, in my opinion, it's only maybe when you go on a road trip that you start to like think about some things, but day to day you just forget about it.
Oh,
Whereas being in
for
it
driving
in
around
your
town, it's easy peasy. It's
yeah,
the best thing you could do. If you can plug in at home 99% of the time, that's it. You never have to
right,
charge at a public charger or level 3 charger on the road because, once again, cars typically now have 300 plus
you have
miles of
enough
range,
range to
and
go where you need and back.
yeah, and you're back at home, and that's another of these marketing message thing is, when there's getting to these discussions with people, I need the gas, I need this, I need that, range anxiety, blah blah blah. This is the reason why, EVs suck and my gas car is better. I'm like, I don't, because I don't live at home, but I'm having these arguments with people or discussions, people that do have homes. I'm like, you're pulling out of your driveway with a full tank of electrons
Yeah,
every single day. And you've already discounted the fact that you do have to stop for 5 to 10 minutes to fill up for gas at the most inopportune moment on a
right,
regular basis. You've eliminated that out of the equation if you can charge at home and you primarily drive around town. But none of that really matters because even for people who only road trip 2-3 times a year, it's like they still want that convenience. I could just say, all
right,
right, listen, I've crunched the numbers here, and if you're going to road trip 3 times a year, it's going to cost you, an hour and 30 minutes more in the light in a span of a year, more for charging, in on that road trip. Sure, so you lost an hour, so you lost half an hour per road trip. So those are 30 minutes per road trip that you won't get back unless you start talking about all the 5-minute fill-ups you did over the course of the year, which ended up costing you 5 hours of time.
yeah.
So it's a net gain. That doesn't matter. All they see is my road trip's going to be a half hour longer. Therefore, EVs are not for me.
And I think there's even going back to your the conversation we kind of had first had, where you're talking about what kind of forced you to get it, and you had the environmental belief, which I've always kind of believed in seen too. But I know for a lot of people that maybe they're like, come on the fence or not sure. I think just inherently, if you have the ability to charge at home, and especially if you're fortunate enough to like solar or something, what's really cool is its independence.
Yeah.
And I think that is a messaging thing that would sell with more people if it's positioned that way. But I think what's really interesting is, given your situation where you do have to like kind of go to the charging station, it's a more analogous experience day to day with a traditional combustion vehicle. Yeah. And that has its pros and cons. And I think it's really cool to kind of hear the way you're going about it. You're just being completely honest. It's like when it works, it's great. But having that kind of inconvenience.
Ironically, the flow chargers nearby work every time. That is a gas station like experience. They're wonderful. I really am pulling for them, and I hope they expand throughout this city and throughout the country. It was a pilot program. I know that New York is evaluating other players right now for the expansion, and the way New York moves, it's probably going to be still a few more years away. But actually, I do want to shift gears here for a second, or it's along the lines of what we're talking about right now, and I'm talking about level 2 charging in a city, in an urban environment. And this is a big thing, right? Because no matter what, rationally speaking, most people who live in the cities are really challenged to own an EV. And there just aren't enough public chargers right now.
Especially in a city like New York or LA, where there's just,
any big city where there's apartment buildings or even condos, it could still even be in the suburbs. There's there's a lot of challenges to that. There's a local company here called It's Electric. Are you familiar with them at all?
I'm not sure.
So it's a amazing concept here, and I know there's a few other players out here that have different sort of ways of trying to bring electricity to the masses in urban environments. But I think the holdup for Flow is these chargers are still pretty expensive. Rip up the sidewalk, plugging into a substation. Some people want to do lampposts, but lampposts are apparently it's single phase electricity in the United States, and you need 2-phase electricity. So there's still going to be a lot of infrastructure work that needs to be done. So It's Electric. Their concept is let's just go to where the electricity is already, and that is in your apartment building, in a storefront, commercial, anything that's on curbside. That building has electricity, and they probably have excess electricity. So what they're doing, they're still piloting right now. What they're doing is they'll say, "Hey, I happen to live in a condo here. Like I've actually put my name on the list." So they're like, "All right, you have a condo. You know, particularly if it's a modern building. If it's an older one, you may have more challenges. I live in a condo. There's X amount of of electricity that's kind of when they lay down the lines, pipe in, it's supposed to handle the max load of what this
Yeah.
building needs, right? It's up to spec. But of course, you're not using max electricity all the time. Now, I'm sure in the summer when all air conditioners are humming, that might be a different story. But there's a lot of times here, especially at night, where you're using a very small percentage of the electricity available. So they say, hey, we'll tap in. We're going to handle all of the infrastructure. We're going to handle all of the, we're going to handle all the finances. We're going to tap into your electricity. We're going to install these sort of I don't know. It's not even a kiosk. It's these sort of curbside accessories. It looks like a square fire hydrant,
Huh.
and it's a bring your own cable type of concept. So if these things are dotted throughout the city, and basically they split the profits with the building that's providing the electricity. So this should be from the building's perspective, it's like I don't have to pay for anything. You're
Right.
maintaining this thing. I don't have to do anything, and you're going to give me a small revenue share from people are plugging in. So if these things are dotting the city, it's a lot easier because they're plugging into the infrastructure that already exists. It shouldn't be nearly as expensive to install these things. It's a really novel concept that could really take off. And I do, when I'm looking at the future, put my futurist hat on, like, how is this going to work in an urban center? How are we going to get full mainstream adoption of EVs? That to me is the path of least resistance, and it's something that in theory should work. So I'm really bullish on them, but it's also probably going to be quite a few more years until you see one on every street corner.
But I think that's great to hear there's solutions for it. But I think that's also one of the things that, like, just because it's still years out, it just means it's going to get better. There's
Yeah.
still opportunity for people to do it now today. But I agree with you. It's like more options, the better. And even when you go to Europe, you're kind of right, where there's a lot of existing systems that have been leveraged to kind of be modernized to equip with EVs. And I think that sounds like a great option for exactly that.
Europe's ahead of the curve. China's way ahead of the curve. We are definitely the laggards over here. There's no question about it. So, and with the Trump administration basically freezing all of these federal funds for the build out, it's gonna take longer. It's still happening. The momentum's is not stopping, but it is gonna slow down a little bit. Those federal funds commingled with private funds, we're going to really accelerate infrastructure growth, and it's going to take a little longer right now. They've got their ulterior motives behind it. I get it. There's a lot of oil money that backed the Trump administration. I think everyone was hoping that having Musk there'd be some net positive for the EV industry, and in a certain way, it's like, oh, actually, elimination of federal subsidies for purchase actually probably helps Tesla more than anyone else because they're the most efficient, electric automaker. They make more money. They make
Right.
money on their EVs. Everyone else loses money on them. So they're like, fine, whatever. We're still going to do better than everyone else. This is besides the fact of all the stuff that Musk has been doing and turning people off and really turning people off to Teslas. But that's a whole nother ball of wax. But no, I think I was hoping that having him there would be a more EV friendly administration. They're saying one thing, but no, in reality, they're still gonna be backing EV infrastructure
Maybe
rollout.
I'm overly optimistic. I'll just say it's only been 1 month. Maybe the best is yet to come, but I agree that it does not seem to be. To be honest with you, I was never, unfortunately, very. I kind of like, yeah, there's a lot of oil money behind this. I unfortunately don't see this being as good of an outcome as it could be.
Yeah.
Maybe
Well, I think
that'll
I
change,
honestly,
but we'll
there's
see.
a lot of oil money, but literally Musk's money
Yeah,
is
that's true.
greater than all of. It's
That's a fair point,
unbelievable.
actually. Yeah,
Maybe even he has deeper pockets in the oil industry.
right.
Maybe he does. It's certainly close.
Yeah, I mean that could easily be its own podcast to itself.
Yeah.
But
Right.
I think it is really interesting, just kind of looking at the current state of things, and not even politics aside, but I mean, what are some of the conversations you have with people like day to day that are kind of where you live or just like on the street and that like Do you find that it's kind of like a positive curiosity? Do you find like it's like kind of almost shock? Whenever I've gone like into road trips in the Midwest and gone to some really rural places, people always assume that like I'd begin coal rolled and all these things. And I was consistently surprised. Everyone was really like polite. And I never had like a native experience. I maybe had one or two like, okay, that's probably not for me, but good on you.
Yeah.
And so I'm just kind of curious what your experience has been. I'm sure it's
So,
probably similar. I always find the disconnect between reality and social media to be pretty much night and day when it comes to this.
Well, I can tell you here in New York, I still remember. Once again, I told you I invested in Tesla a long time ago. Man, I still remember seeing like the first like Model X driving down the street. I'm like, oh my god! And even
It's real.
Cybertruck the first time, like, holy smokes, there's one for real in the wild. But there's actually a lot of EVs in New York, and they've incentivized New York City's incentivized all the Uber drivers to buy EVs. So they're kind of like everywhere. They're just mainstream here. There's still it's still the minority, but seeing them around is easy. It's interesting. There's no kind of you don't hear there's no coal rolling. There's none of that stuff here, and no one's talking smack about your EV. It's like it's whatever. It's just a car over here. It's just part of the mosaic of New York City. But it is interesting how since I started the podcast, a lot of people, what I call, and you probably call them that as well, the EV curious. I don't think I know I didn't coin that phrase, but I use it all the time. Is all of a sudden out of the woodwork, friends of mine and acquaintances, oh, my brother-in-law is thinking of getting an EV. Could he talk to you? And other friends of mine, what's it like? Tell me more. And my lease is coming up soon. So you get a lot more of those conversations. But still, there's a massive hesitancy, and still a lot of people who are even the EV curious, they get gun shy. They still, at the moment of truth, they chicken out. And that's because there's been so much misinformation that's out there. And it's really hard to combat. I had an interesting conversation also this morning. And this is another side note here. So my EV9, and this is a whole nother story. It is actually, I love my EV9. It's a great car. There's a known issue with front end vibration on these cars. It's sort of, some cars have it, most do not, but I don't think Kia knows how to resolve the issue. And so, or I actually pulled the lemon law card and said, hey, you guys tried 3 times already to fix this. The dealership's like, we give up. And so Kia's really good. They hook you up with Better Business Bureau, and they go, okay, fine, no problem. You can speak to them, and we'll go into arbitration, which is nice. And that's where we are right now. So they may be buying it back. I'm going to get another EV to be determined which one it is. I still love the EV9. It very well may be. If they just offer me a new one, I'll just probably take a new EV9. But I had to have the inspector come in here and verify the issue of this front end vibration. It's just a regular dude that lives here in New York City, and a Brooklyn resident. And so of course we're talking about EVs. And he's just like, I don't know. I think I'm waiting for hydrogen. And it's like, these are the sort of conversations you hear, whether it's the range anxiety, I hear these things. I'm like, no, it's like, hydrogen's not coming for your car. 10 years, you're going to be waiting 100 years probably. Hydrogen is for airplanes, possibly for fleet electrification. Maybe it will in the whole ecosystem. There is a place for hydrogen, but it's not going to be your EVs. For most, the layperson does not understand what's going on behind the scenes that we do, because we geek out on this stuff. And there's all that misinformation. People, another friend of mine, his wife, she has family up in Ithaca, New York, and that's about a 3-hour drive from here, 3 to 4 hour drive from here. And so he's also, with my EVs, kind of always, I kind of like to tell me more about it. He's one of those guys as well. I'm like, and his car is quite a few years old. I'm like, and it's starting to have problems. I'm like, well, why don't you think about getting one yourself? And he's like, oh no, my wife, she says she drives up to Ithaca to see her family like, twice a year. There's no chargers up there. There's no way she could never make it there and back again. I'm like, all right, this is a simple Google search away, but it doesn't matter. And pulled up my route planning app, and I go, you can almost make it there and back on one charge. First of all, if you got a Tesla, and number two, here's like a million chargers that are literally in Ithaca. You can charge overnight or get fast charge here if you wanted. That's not an issue, but it doesn't matter. His wife is like, these things don't work. This is too much of a headache. This is too much. I don't want to deal with this. I don't want to deal with learning something new. All of these things come into play. People don't want to, they already have been conditioned to understand how a gas car works. Even when they get into a new gas car, an ICE vehicle, it's going to do pretty much the same thing that the last one did. And when I got into my Kia, by the way, like I already told you, the UI is okay. It's not great. It's complicated. It's a little clunky. It's good. It's not great. It took me like 2 weeks to really, I was taking, the app or the user manual, taking it home with me and just studying it like it was a college course. I wanted to learn. I would just go out in the car and just hit buttons. After my wife, like, are you coming back in? Like, just need another hour over here.
Yeah.
Not everyone wants to do that. And that's, once again, back to your original question, all of these things, the consensus I'm getting from everyone around me is X, Y, Z, whatever it is, too complicated. I don't want to deal with it. And the saving the planet card, it doesn't work. It's absolutely positively pointless for rational people who are still like, yeah, I know climate change is real and we need to do something, but it's going to make my life more complicated. And what difference does it make if I just change, if I change to an EV, it's not going to change anything. And they're right. It's a macro thing. We all have to change. So but that's the constant thing that I'm hearing all around, is for people who are not totally into it, the complication of, installing a home charger. I don't know. I hear those things are expensive.
Well, and this kind of comes back to two earlier things. One, you mentioned Matt Teskey and ChargeAway, and I think they do a really good job of, like, Matt said for years, like, the messaging around electrification and charging, call electric fuel. Just keep it simple. The messaging has just been god awful. But the second part to that too is, like, when you're talking about like plug-in hybrids, because that's also like, well, maybe I'll just do a plug-in hybrid.
Yeah.
And the funny thing that I've seen personally is both my mother-in-law and then my own mother, their husbands both had EVs first, and they do a lot of driving, and so they're like, well, I'll get a plug-in hybrid. Mm-hmm. They are the only people I have seen with plug-in hybrids who actually charge them, because there's already an EV charger at the house. And in that case, yeah, okay, they're doing it. They are pretty consistent about it. But yeah, I think the use case of, in theory, and like selling the idea of a plug-in hybrid's nice. But like when it comes, like, once you have it, like, oh, I got to pay like $2,000 or something to install it. Like, oh, whatever. Yeah. No, I'll do. And so maybe you go to like the grocery store or somewhere there's a level 2 or something else, and then you see it's taken by someone in a plug-in hybrid. I've seen that quite a bit. Mm-hmm. But I think that's one of the interesting things too, is just like going full EV is that forcing function to actually make the kind of commitment to actually using it, to actually having a battery electric, and like offsetting a lot of your fuel costs. Obviously, I'm still a big fan of just going, either go full electric or go like full combustion and just get a nice like weekend classic car. But I do think it's still just such an interesting dichotomy of what the messaging is leading up to a purchase, and like how it's positioned, where it's like, oh, okay, I guess I could just do a plug-in electric hybrid. But then once you actually have to use it day to day, it's like, oh, I got to install that also. That'll be my next car.
It's friction. It's part exactly. Of, all right, I'll install it eventually, and then you don't. And I'm sure some people do it right, much like your family does. And there are plenty of people who are, I'm sure, using the plug-in hybrids correctly, and and have to fuel up once every 2 months, and it's wonderful, right? It can work. And this range extender concept, which is basically the same thing, if that technology really can kind of catch on, I guess I guess that's going to be a solution that's going to help a lot of people. Like, I've always got the emergency pack
Yeah.
in my car. There's this, another conversation I have with a friend of mine. He wants to get the Scout when it comes out, right? So he's another EV curious guy who's getting a little more serious than some of my other friends. He's like, all right, I got my eye on the Scout. I really like the Scout, even though there's comparable vehicles out right now. But he's got the Scout, and the Scout is marketing one of their models will have that range extender. And he's even telling me, he's like, did you ever think about having like an emergency battery pack in the back of your car just in case? And I'm like, that would take up anything that would be worthwhile would take up all of this space, add all of this weight. And he's like, yeah, but isn't it nice to know you've got this emergency extra range? I'm like, yeah, do you have an extra gas tank in your car? It's like,
Right.
no, you look at the gas gauge, and when the light comes on, you take it very seriously, and that's when you start really looking for a gas station. And I go, listen, my emergency pack is that extra 10% after it goes to zero. And I'm like, but from him, who's never driven an EV before, like, range anxiety, this is how you combat it. And these range extenders, it's the same thing. When I look at a car with a range extender is, now I got a gas engine in my car that's going to require all of this maintenance eventually that I don't want to deal with, when the car is a lot older. And stale gas sitting in the tank. It's just more complication. No matter how big the vehicle is, and how efficient they get.
The oil, you still have oil changes, which is like one of the big reasons I got rid of it. Got rid of driving combustion. It's just I drive so much, I had a lot of oil changes.
Yeah.
And then I think the other thing that's always been so fascinating, I don't know for sure about all of these E-Rev style like the Scout, but I would imagine it must be, is with so many of the plug-in hybrids, the gas tank is actually under pressure to help prevent the gas from essentially decaying.
Yeah.
Because and that was kind of the issue with like the Chevy Volt. And so there's like, to me, like from an engineering perspective, not only do you have the concerns that people have that are usually way overplayed when it comes to like an electric vehicle and the battery in the accident, you now have a gas tank, but you also have a gas tank that's actually under pressure.
Oh,
and so to me, it's like
everything
that could go wrong, you've really just amped up a lot. And I mean, to me, that's always, you can engineer around it, but and same with like hydrogen, but those were always the things that I would just like, this, you're really overcomplicating it if you're really worried about like concern and that stuff. But I do understand. I feel like when you're going into the purchasing experience and thinking and justifying of buying an EV or a plug-in hybrid, that's where range anxiety comes in. What changes once you have it, depending on the vehicle and just situation, is then the charger anxiety actually in the practice. And I think that's really the difference, because really now the range isn't the issue. It's usually, is the charger I'm going to have to go to working? Yeah. Fortunately, I haven't ran into that issue. I've gotten to some pretty random remote places.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, even when I went to Electrify America and a couple other ones, but they were all ones I could go through an app and check that they're allegedly live, which I have been let down by in the past. But I was driving through very rural parts of Nevada that had chargers that said they were live. And I was like, well, this is either going to be a one-way trip or I'm going to tell the tale. And it was fine. So it's like things are definitely getting better.
They are. Yeah. But as we discussed, it's not there yet. An interesting little side note here. So as I mentioned before, Kias are supposed to be, the whole NACS standard,
right?
North American Charging Standard, Phil. So now I spelled out that acronym as well. So the NACS standard, as we all know, is the standard plug-in style that we're all going to use. That's what are on the Tesla's chargers. They use NACS, and now even Kias, now they're manufactured here in the U.S. are having NACS plug. Everyone's going NACS. That's the future. CCS is what the legacy cars like mine have. So all you need is an adapter. It doesn't really matter. You can, if the supercharging network's open, all you need is an adapter, and I can still plug into a supercharger. But there's a little thing here that no one is mentioning, unless you once again geek out and go in the forums and start speaking to engineering types. And do you know where I'm going with this?
I think I have something to do with voltage
architecture, the EGMP of the Hyundais and the Kias, which is a more modern architecture for an EV than what the Tesla Model 3 and Y have, which is 400-volt architecture. So what happens is when you pull up to a supercharger with an 800-volt architecture car, they have to have the time or should I say it doubles the amount of time it
Right.
takes to charge. So
You
suddenly
trade
now it's kind of a
reliability
slow
for charge
charger.
time. Yeah, exactly.
So you get the reliability, but although there's V4 cabinets coming out for the
Right.
Superchargers, which are capable of powering up an
This
800
should
volt.
also be changing over time in the greater scheme of
Yes.
everything. But yet you're right. It is yet to be seen. I think Tesla has their own reason for doing it. And to be honest with you, I don't know this for a fact, but it is part of the reason I think that Tesla hasn't been in a rush to make more 800 volt vehicles other than the Cybertruck, because that was kind of a one-off luxury thing that those buyers will be happy just to have it. If they're inconvenienced every now and then by a slower charger, they're going to be first adopters. They won't mind as much.
It's like, this is the price you have to pay.
And they did do some engineering around it, so it kind of splits the pack, so it's not as effective, but it is effective.
Yeah, I think supposedly the Lucid does some weird stuff where it knows how to split the power as well, and so you actually can get a full speed charge even on an older Tesla supercharger. I believe so. You're more of the engineering type.
I haven't played enough with the Lucid as I want to, but from everything I've seen,
the new SUV Lucid, I read.
Yeah, I think that thing's really cool. I would love to play with one of those and kind of see one more in person. But from what I've heard and seen of people in real life again, it does some clever engineering to kind of help that, but there's still a pretty big delta. I mean, the pro and con of going to like super high. I mean, and the problem is with like this whole 400, 800 volt thing, most cars aren't even 800 volt. Like all the new Porsches, or not all of them, but like the Macan's like 600 volt technically.
Yeah.
So there's all sorts of kind of weird things that can happen. So if like you have a 400 volt location, but it actually puts out at 500, 600, some cars won't be affected. Others are. But that's a whole nother thing. And even some of the Kias are more like high 6s, 7s.
Yeah.
But once again, this is like getting too geeky, and then there's so many like different if this then that, but on Tuesday when it's 35 degrees, yada yada yada. And so I am hopeful that the V4 cabinets that Tesla is going to do, they really lean into it, just because from what they're saying, who knows what actually happens. They're saying they're going to have more 800 volt vehicles coming out soon, and I think that is probably part of the justification to actually make the experience more consistent with what traditional Tesla drivers have been used to. Because if they start running into that, I don't think that's going to be positive. And with opening the supercharger network, it is in their best interest to make sure that other vehicles that do charge aren't there for a long time to kind of have that throughput. So
it's in their best interest.
Cautiously optimistic. We'll see what happens there.
Yeah, I mean, listen, there's the whole thing also with charging curves as well, which Teslas aren't great with. Kias are. They can hold a high throughput for longer, much longer than a Tesla. Just out of curiosity, what's your kind of average time for 10% to 80% state of charge with Tesla?
That's a great question. I usually don't charge that long. Or if I do, it's like I went to go do something else. I would love to see it be more in the realm. It's somewhere in the 20 minutes, I would imagine. Probably high 20s. Yeah.
It's for me. It's also I think like chargers. There's just variants, and you don't trust them. And even when they're rated, this one's rated at 350. This one's rated. It's hyper fast. This one's 180. It's kind of like,
well, and that's the whole issue.
Maybe
as well.
It's
350 kilowatts, but it's at a certain voltage versus amperage, and this one's a different amperage and voltage to get to that 350. Wow. And I think this is one of those growing pains that will change soon, especially not just with Tesla, like Alpitronic that's supplying a lot of the chargers to IONNA, like you mentioned, and others that just have really high performance across the bar. So it really shouldn't matter what architecture that people bring to charge it. But I think that the whole 800 volt thing has some perks for sure. And I think more and more vehicles will go that way for sure. But I think it was overhyped as being a cure-all. Once again, I think there's really cool stuff on the efficiency side, especially, but like efficiency and range really is king. And then if it's got good charging, even better.
Yeah. And kind of once again, tying everything together with what we discussed, all of these variables, all of these inconsistencies, all of these lack of standards. This is the reason why this is what gives people pause. They're
Yeah.
like, I'm not sure. I've heard this, I've heard that. And even from us who are the real world experience of it, it's like, they're kind of right. It's still an inconsistent experience if you're a road tripper. If you're not, but that's once again, if this, then that.
Yeah, I mean,
So
if you're a family that has a house and you need a second car, I don't know why you wouldn't do electric.
yeah, I don't know
If
either. Like,
yeah,
there's no reason not to do it.
yeah,
You know, if you're like, okay, I'm concerned about those 3 road trips here. Okay, we'll take the SUV or the bigger one,
right,
and that's it. It makes perfect sense. Already, right now, today.
right.
Um, but yeah,
It's and there are still these edge cases, but they're getting much better,
yeah.
and I am sure they will be solved. But I think in this kind of media realm and just what people's recent experiences with gas are, they think it's like, oh, this needs to be fixed now. And I'm always reminded, this is kind of just a fun automotive trivia, is like when diesel first was offered in a lot of vehicles,
Oh
you
yeah, that blue tech, right? Volkswagen.
well, yeah. No, way before this, like in the
Oh,
50s,
and the
60s.
I mean, I remember. I'm old
Yeah.
enough. I remember when these old Mercedes diesels came out, and chugging with this black smoke coming out of the rear.
But I
Yeah,
mean,
that
just to
was
give you an
supposed to be the
example of
future.
this is when they first started rolling out cars in the US that had diesel or ran on diesel, they actually gave you a map with the car to show you which gas stations around the US offered diesel.
It was
So it's
well,
like,
obviously
and
the
it took a
infrastructure.
decade. It took decades to get this all figured out to have all of them to have
You're
diesel
right.
at these
Well,
locations.
diesel was obviously the infrastructure was there for the trucks. So on the
Yeah,
highways, it was never an issue. Ironically, it's the exact opposite
yeah,
that you have with the EVs now. So highway driving was easy
that's a good point.
with
Yeah,
the
yeah.
diesel. And I had one, by the way. I had a Volks, a 19. It was used. It was one of my first cars. It was a 1980 Volkswagen Rabbit diesel.
Oh, awesome.
And so it got 50 miles to the gallon.
That's
It could
crazy.
barely do 65 miles an hour.
Yeah,
With a headwind, that was it. You're stuck at if you had a slight grade, you could get it to 70. It was slow. It was a 4-speed stick. Um, and I kind of loved it also. But yeah, that fuel gauge just didn't move. It just stayed there forever. It was kind of
yeah.
amazing. But yeah, when you got off the highway and you went into towns, you learned, Jesus, way before the internet, right? I didn't have a map either. I bought that thing used. You just learned, here's in my college town, here's where that one gas
Yeah.
station that sells diesel is. And the good news once again is that the car probably had about 500 miles of range. So, you
Yeah.
learned not to go to E. You learned, if you were in unfamiliar territory, by the time you got to a quarter tank, there's still plenty left. You started kind of looking around for the place to fill up.
So it's kind of just looking at the history of it is why I stay optimistic. This isn't the first time that there have been these. In the scheme of things, this isn't a very wild technological thing. Not only are you having to figure out all the gas infrastructure, you literally just need electricity. And I've been doing this more this past year just because of moving and having a rental. We've been level 1 charging way more than I expected to be, and it's been totally fine. And we still drive between Bend and Hood River and Portland. So doing 150 mile trips regularly. And it's been fun just on level 1 charging.
Yeah, and truly, you're the perfect case of you get away with it. So for
It's
everyone
like
that
just
doesn't
being
know
able
what
to
level
charge it
1
where you're
is,
going. Yeah, I mean,
yeah,
there's ways to hack it, but it just shows that it is doable.
yeah,
And
it's so just for everyone who's also uninitiated, level 1 is just your AC outlet, 110, and it's sort of like let's give you like a mile an hour or something like that. Is that
I
the
think it's like
speed?
a few. Yeah, I
Or
always
maybe
look at
2
the
or 3 miles
percent.
per hour of charge.
I think it's
It,
like 5 or something, and then it's like I never use the miles per the mile rating because I
yeah,
always just think that's BS. So I just go off percent, and that's like 1
yeah.
to 1.5% per hour. But at the same time, I mean, and that kind of goes to the beauty of just like having a really efficient vehicle. It just means you add that much more charge faster, even all these things. But I'm still blown away by the fact that I can plug my car into the same outlet I put my electric toothbrush in,
Yeah,
and it
yeah,
still charges it.
and it works. And
It
when
doesn't. I
people
mean, even if it's slow, it's kind of wild that little power can power my car.
and as you mentioned, you drive a lot, and when you have a Tesla and you have a reliable supercharger network, all right, fine. So for this trip, it's not going to work. So I guess
Yeah.
I'll have to stop and plug in on the way towards my destination, and it won't be a big deal because I have full faith that the charging experience is going to be a good one. And yeah, and you're a perfect example of why you don't even necessarily need to even install that level 2 charger, which, by the way, Ford now, and I think one other manufacturer is starting to offer like basically a free level 2
Right, which
charger
is
with
really cool
purchase,
too.
because they
And yeah, I mean, they
understand
kind of
that
just
the
gave in the
friction.
challenge, admitted like this is the challenge. This needs to be solved, and we'll help buyers do it.
Yeah, it's another marketing thing, which I think is a really smart move. It's one less thing to worry about, and with level 2, once again, you're getting a full charge overnight. So just in case that's a problem, you're too concerned about that, it solves that issue as well.
You know, Rob, I know I appreciate all this, and this has been a really great conversation. I realize we've kind of come up to time, but one thing I wanted to ask you, especially being the urban EV podcast man himself and living in New York, we talked about a little bit around rideshare drivers and kind of EV charging. That's been kind of a common topic, I feel like, for quite a few of the last episodes. Is like EVgo, I forget how many quarters ago, released this data saying that 25% of their public charging is actually due to rideshare drivers. And I'm kind of curious, just in your experience, like you have this fortunately really close to you. Do you see as that being kind of a combative thing or an issue you run into, is like when you're trying to get that charger, it is usually a rideshare driver or someone visiting
Ironically,
from out of the city or a local also charging their EV?
it's a valid question. Ironically, I don't see that many rideshare chargers on the level
Oh,
2
great.
chargers, because they need to, because unless they happen to live right next door, they're going to have to keep it on that charger for hours.
Yeah.
So it's not worth their while. They're going to all the, they're going to the fast chargers, and that's where it's a mob scene. And
Yeah.
I've heard horror stories like near the airport, where all the taxi drivers congregate, big lines. I know some of the chargers there. It might be Electrify America. I can't remember which charge point operator is. They sent out some message saying, "Hey, 80%, you're cut off. You're not allowed to sit here and
Yeah, I
charge
think that was
200 anymore, because there's too long of a line." So there are these challenges in urban centers where the high speed chargers are, where you are going to be competing with the ride share drivers. But once again, within the urban center, if you do live in an urban center, if you're solely relying on high speed charging, which, by the way, it's comparable to gas as far as how much it costs per kilowatt hour. So it's already a little more expensive to buy the EV, and now the fuel is basically the same thing.
Yeah.
You don't have access to a level 2. You're an edge case, and you probably should not be getting an EV at this moment. You should have, at the very least, access to a public level 2 charger. So I find the rideshare drivers are pretty much in the urban areas, but if you do have public level 2 charging nearby, it's worth your while. But if you want to compete with the level 3s, you may have some challenges depending on where you are. It depends on what part of the city. I know there's a charger near me where it's near where my son plays soccer, where I've topped off over there, and it's been full, quite a few times. It's funny. It's interesting. Just in the last 2 years, I drove by even before I had an EV. It used to be empty every time. Like, they're going out of business. It's actually, I didn't realize this is a part of microgrids, which they're sort of their main business is battery storage. So
Gotcha.
they're sort of like
That's cool.
supplementary storage for the grid. So they have these big, massive battery packs, and they're like, all right, we might as well put a charger here while we're at it as well. But I didn't know what that at the time. I'm driving by, I'm like, they're going out of business. Slowly but surely, over 2 years, oh my God, I see someone charging in there. And I actually made a social media post about this about 3 or 4 months ago. It was the first time I saw it full in a line. The first time I saw it full, and then the next day I saw a line to get in there.
Yeah.
And they were all, and now every time I drive by, it's almost always full, and it's rideshare drivers. Yeah, they've discovered that charger now. It's obviously word's gotten out. So yeah, there are challenges in some urban areas for level 3 charging, but to be quite honest with you, most people who live in these areas, you really don't use them. You almost never use them, because you do have access to the level 2s.
Well, and it's definitely something we've talked about, where we just compare it to the traditional fueling industry, and it's like, well, most taxi drivers don't go to a gas station, or fleet vehicles don't go to the gas station. There is commercial fueling location.
Here in New York, they actually do go to the gas.
It's not uncommon. They might have a fueling card, but in a lot of places, even in large cities, they'll usually have a commercial fueling station or location, or even at the taxi place itself, that they get discounted gas. So there's things like that I'd love to see that would help kind of maybe pull some of that off of these for that experience. But you're right. Like, The more hotels or other places, especially for people visiting, that can have that level 2, you really don't need it.
Hotels
Or
need
even
to
easy
up their
level
game.
1. Yeah.
This is a big thing here, and I've kind of made the argument that hopefully eventually it's going to be the continental breakfast and the free coffee. If the hotel doesn't offer it, you just go to the next one because
Right.
that
I
one
mean,
is
that's been a
offering it
big
and they
thing for
need
me
it.
personally.
And I think there's going to be a critical mass. It has not happened yet. I'm just kind of amazed at how few hotels offer level 2 charging. Obviously, there's still some upfront capital costs, but I know the big chains can afford it, and they just have to see the value proposition. And eventually, when everyone has it, then the value proposition will be there because they'll be losing business when they don't have it. Yeah, that's for another day.
Rob, no, thank you so much for coming on today. This was a great conversation. Pleasure to meet you, and looking forward to having more on here. For anyone that is listening, what's the best way to keep up and learn about your podcast and any other of the services that you're offering right now?
Well, you can. I'm a video producer by trade, so that is sort of my thing. I like producing podcasts. I like producing video content as well. But you can find me. You can find my podcast, the Urban EV Podcast, on Spotify, on Apple Podcasts. I'm pretty active on LinkedIn. That's my main social media channel. Once again, Urban EV. The website is urbanev.co, but I don't. Does that even matter anymore? Does anyone go to websites?
Well, I'll be sure to have links to all of them in today's show notes for people just to have that
Wonderful.
direct link.
Chase, it was a pleasure. Thank you for having me on the show.
That wraps another episode of Grid Connections. A huge thanks to Robert Hoffman for sharing his experiences and shedding light on what it truly takes to own and charge an electric vehicle in a dense urban environment. From the challenges of fast charging reliability to the exciting potential of curbside solutions, we hope this episode has given you fresh insights into the evolving electric vehicle landscape. If you found today's conversation valuable, be sure to share this episode with someone who might enjoy it as well. And while you're at it, leave us a quick review on your favorite podcast platform. It really helps us reach more EV enthusiasts and industry leaders. And don't forget to sign up for our new Grid Connections newsletter. Get expert insights, exclusive content, and the latest updates straight to your inbox. The sign-up link and all of today's content can be found in today's show notes. Thanks for tuning in, and this is the Grid Connections podcast, signing off.